Hope you're doing well today. It's April 17th. Our reading today comes from 1 Samuel. In 1 Samuel chapter 24 and 25, our reading also includes Psalm 54. But 1 Samuel 24, this is one of the accounts of David sparing Saul's life. The other account of David sparing Saul's life, which I believe is in the cave, I believe the second one's, maybe this first, yeah, the first one's in the cave, and the second one is there as Saul is sleeping. Pardon me. But anyway, in between those two is the account of Nabal. Preached on this a few months ago and made the point that it's interesting that you have this chapter of David being merciful, and then you have chapter 26, David being merciful, and then in between those two you have chapter 25 with Nabal, where David at first is going to be very unmerciful. And I just think that that's interesting, and talked about how, sometimes we, in the big moments, that we do the right thing, but then sometimes we let our guard down, or the things that we think are insignificant, and that's when that's all of a sudden David is very unmerciful. And it's Abigail who stops him throughout the possibility that perhaps with everything going on with Saul, that perhaps what David was doing with Nabal was transferring some of his anger. Sometimes people do that. They're really mad at someone else, but they feel like they can't get at them, and so they take it out on, not to say that Nabal was a good guy, but Nabal's kind of insignificant in the grand scheme of things. But anyway, but I want to look at Nabal. Let's look at Nabal. So here in 1 Samuel chapters 24, 25, chapter 25, here David is. He's on the run from Saul, and David hears Nabal shearing his sheep, and you can tell what's going on, that David's men are protecting Nabal's sheep shears. And he says they didn't hurt him or anything like that. So anyway, so David asks for a favor from Nabal, and to just focus in on Nabal, I'll stop rambling, pardon me. Nabal answered David's servants and said, "Who is David, and who is the son of Jesse? There are many servants nowadays who break away each one from his master. Shall I then take my bread and my water and my meat that I have killed for my shearers, and give it to men whom I do not know where they're from?" So David's young men turned on their heels, went back. They came and told him all these words. David said, "We're going to kill them all." Effectively, to paraphrase it, so one of the young men tells Abigail, Nabal's wife, and says, "Listen, these guys were good to us. They didn't hurt us. We didn't miss anything while they were gone. When they were with us in the fields, they protected us. And they're asking for this favor, but our master, Nabal, he's telling them off." Verse 17, he's such a scoundrel, no one can speak to him. So Abigail intervenes. So to key in on Nabal, and to back up to these verses here, verse 10 more specifically. Who is David? And we know from the account, like, David had been doing Nabal a favor. Nabal didn't realize it, but David had been protecting his assets. David had not been stealing from him. David had actually been doing him some service. And Nabal is ungrateful. Who is David? Who is David, and who is the son of Jesse? And they say, verse 8, "Ask your young men, they will tell you. Your shepherds were with us. We did not hurt them, nor is there anything missing. They were a wall to them." And Nabal, he's just ungrateful. And sometimes we can just be ungrateful. Sometimes we can be ungrateful for things that people do for us, and we can just take it for granted. And when they come and they ask for a favor, or our general treatment of them, we can just be, it's just repugnant when people act like this, we should be grateful. We should be thankful when people do us the smallest of services. And sometimes it just doesn't happen. But not only was Nabal ungrateful, Nabal was also disrespectful. Who is David? Who is the son of who's Jesse? They knew who David was. Abigail knew who David was. Everyone knew who David was because David had slain Goliath. David had killed Goliath. Everybody knew that account. All Israel was singing about it. It was on the top 40 hits of the time. They sang the song, Saul's killed his thousands, David his 10,000s. That was making the rounds. Everybody knew it. He was just being disrespectful. And sometimes when we're acting like Nabal, when we're acting foolish, we can be disrespectful. And it happens. We can go down the same road. And we can have to, like David, we can have to endure the same thing. We can do the same thing and we can have to endure the same thing. Because sometimes folks are just ungrateful and sometimes folks are just disrespectful. And the servants say he's such a scoundrel you can't speak to him. He wouldn't listen. He just wouldn't listen. Now, why wouldn't he listen? Well, I don't know. He's rich. He's got a lot of money, and sometimes that's all people care about. And they will put up with anything and everything because, well, he's rich. He's got a lot of goods. And sometimes people will let the rich get away with murder because they're rich. And they don't, for whatever reason. But not only would he not listen because he was rich, Abigail comes after she's seen David. And Abigail at first comes to him, and it says that he was very drunk. And he was merry in his heart. But he was very drunk. Abigail waits till the next morning. Abigail didn't say anything to him, good or bad, till the next morning when the wine left him. And then Abigail says, this is what's going to happen. Let's look over at that account. The next morning, come down a little bit further. After Abigail meets with David, Abigail went to Nabal. There he was holding a feast in his house like the feast of a king. And Nabal's heart was merry within him, for he was very drunk. Therefore she told him nothing, little or much, until morning light. And so it was in the morning, when the wine had gone from Nabal, and his wife told him these things, that his heart died within him, and he became like a stone. Then it happened after about 10 days that the Lord struck Nabal, and he died. What was he doing for those 10 days? You know, he could have repented. He could have turned to the Lord. He could have come to David, asked for mercy. He could have done all sorts of things. Doesn't say that he did. He was throwing a feast. I wonder who all was at that feast. Doesn't look like Abigail was there. I wonder who all was at that feast. And all of a sudden, well, he's rich. Man, he's throwing a party. But he won't listen. He won't listen. And he's such a scoundrel that people can't talk to him. And he's ungrateful to those who are helping him. And he's disrespectful. He's disrespectful. So, we can do the same thing and be just as foolish. So, we have to examine ourselves and change. And thankfully, the Lord is merciful. Thankfully, the Lord, he even gave Nabal 10 days. So will we change with the time we're given. Appreciate you. Hope you have a good day. Hope you join us for our next brief look into God's Word.